When you envision the history of the United States, what comes to mind first? For many, it's not a string of dates, or a parade of powered wigs, or even an endless line of campaign speeches. No, it's pictures. Big, bold, sometimes confusing pictures. It's the stuff you find on postage stamps, in textbooks, and on the walls of the world's most prestigious museums. Americans, after all, have always loved a good spectacle. From the pre-Columbian iconographies of indigenous cultures to the ideological assertions of Revolutionary-era portraiture and the grandeur of the country's landscapes, American art reflects and refracts the nation's evolving cultural and political landscapes. We don't need to like all of it, but we should know where it came from and what it's trying to say. The United States' rich artistic history stretches from the earliest indigenous cultures to the more recent globalization of contemporary art. But before there was a United States, there were nations, hundreds of them. Centuries before the first European colonizers landed, indigenous communities across the continent developed complex visual languages, manifested in sculptural forms, painted surfaces, woven textiles, and ceremonial artifacts. These creations articulated collective memory, the natural environments, and their spiritual belief. In the West in California, we saw effigy figurines and elaborate basketry that is amongst the most intricate in the world. We also saw rock art like the Chumash cave paintings that demonstrate a complex symbolic vocabulary and a deep engagement with the landscape. In the Great Plains region, artists are known for their buffalo hide paintings, beadwork, and quill work. These mediums had decorative purposes, yes, but also functioned as vehicles for historical narration, most notably in the creation of winter counts, which are pictorial calendars that meticulously recorded tribal events and histories. Following the decline of buffalo populations in the late 19th century, the artists of this region adapted to new materials, producing ledger art, which are narrative drawings or paintings executed on paper or cloth, primarily depicting battles and the rapidly shifting social and technological environment, including the introduction of firearms. In the Northwest, indigenous communities such as the Tlingit are known for their monumental wood carving and ceremonial regalia, often painted with representations of animals and supernatural beings. In the Southwest, the Pueblo, Navajo, and Hopi artists are skilled in the art of pottery, weaving, and sand painting. In fact, the Pueblo peoples have been making pottery using methods that have remained largely unchanged since the classic Pueblo period, circa AD 1050. Now, it's interesting to note that the oldest known painted object in North America from 10,000 years ago is the Cooper bison skull. Found in Oklahoma, it bears a red lightning bolt using hematite-based mineral paint, and is the very first record of the deep antiquity of indigenous artistic expression on the continent. Beginning in the late 15th century, European colonizers started arriving in the Americas. Christopher Columbus is the most famous of these early settlers, though he was not the first European to reach the continent. Norse and Scandinavian explorers had landed in what is now Canada centuries earlier. Columbus's arrival is what marked the start of large-scale and sustained European colonization. He instituted practices such as slavery and mass killings that contributed significantly to the depopulation of indigenous communities. And these practices were carried on by the colonizers that came after him for decades. A friar's record of the time even states the severe violence and exploitation inflicted on indigenous peoples. He says, they forced their way into settlements, slaughtering everyone they found there, including small children, old men, pregnant women, and even women who had just given birth. The numbers further ground the reality of these atrocities. When Europeans arrived in Hispaniola in 1492, the estimated indigenous population of the Americas was about 60 million. By the early 17th century, Approximately 90% were killed due to violence, enslavement, forced displacement, or disease. European colonizers also worked to destroy the works of indigenous peoples. They initiated a protracted process of cultural suppression and erasure, wherein indigenous artistic production was either assimilated, devalued, or outright destroyed by colonial systems of power and aesthetics. Yet indigenous artists adapted with resilience. New materials such as glass beads, metal tools, and trade cloth were incorporated into their traditional forms, creating hybrid aesthetics that were both acts of survival and statements of identity. The recognition of indigenous American art within mainstream art history has gained traction only in recent decades. Exhibitions such as MoMA's Indian Art of the United States in 1941 and the ongoing curatorial efforts at institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Denver Art Museum have begun to shift the discourse, but the work of full inclusion and restitution remains far from complete. During the early colonial years, most Western-trained artists were military officers whose training included landscape sketching, reflecting the practical needs of exploration and territorial mapping. As more and more people emigrated to the US, colonial artists, namely portrait artists, were given more support. John Smibert was one of these artists. He arrived from London in 1728 with the hopes of becoming an art professor in Bermuda, but instead became the portrait painter to the elite in Boston. He was a talented European-trained artist that helped to shape the early artistic culture of the American colonies. Folk art in the United States is considered a critical domain of visual culture. It's largely practiced in communities that have often been excluded from elite artistic institutions, whether by class, geography, race, or education. These pieces tell the story of America told not by the powerful, but by regular Americans. It is frequently functional in form, weather vanes, quilts, and furnitures, but expressive in function, having both an aesthetic and narrative purpose. Edward Hicks, who was a Quaker minister, translated religious ideals into a symbolic visual language through the Peaceable Kingdom series. These pieces were inspired by the biblical prophecy of Isaiah and symbolize harmony and redemption, reflecting Hicks' Quaker beliefs and contemporary social divisions. African American folk traditions are exemplified in the narrative quilts of Harriet Powers. Born into slavery, Powers quilts are among the most important examples of 19th century Southern and African American folk art. They are recognized for their remarkable command over shape and color, and the narrative power each thread holds. Today, the legacy of folk art continues to resonate almost 300 years later, particularly through its influence on the concept of outsider art and its challenge to conventional aesthetic hierarchies. The signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776 marked the official beginning of the American national identity, and this new nation needed a history and iconography to go along with it. Colonial painters continued to rely on European stylistic conventions, but a distinctive American narrative did start to take form, particularly through portrait and historical paintings. Portraiture was used as a tool for colonial planters, merchants, and political leaders to assert and display their social status, to celebrate their family, or hint at their aspirations. The elite had the only hand in play in creating the vision around what the Federal period art should be, and John Singleton Copley was their artist of choice. In his portrait of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Mifflin, for instance, the depiction of Sarah Mifflin spinning yarn is a deliberate reference to the political act of boycotting British goods, signaling the couple's commitment to the American cause. His portraits of Paul Revere or founding fathers like Samuel Adams and John Hancock helped to document America's transformation into an independent nation. Another portrait artist was Gilbert Stuart. His famous unfinished portrait of George Washington became the model for the image on the US $1 bill. The artist John Trumbull took to historical paintings, such as this one, Declaration of Independence. Here we see the presentation of the draft document to the Second Continental Congress. Trumbull's goal with this painting was not strict historical accuracy in the events, but rather he wanted to create an enduring image of the nation's founders and the ideals they represented. He included 47 figures, many painted from life, to symbolize the collective effort behind American independence. In the 1820s, the very first distinctly American artistic movement began. The Hudson River School, led by Thomas Cole, and including members such as Albert Bierstadt, Frederick Edwin Church, and Asher B. Durand, was based out of Upper New York State. These artists wanted to capture the sublime grandeur and unique beauty of the wilderness they saw around them, particularly that of the Hudson River Valley, Catskill, Adirondacks, and later the American West and South America. In part, they looked to the Romanticism movement of Europe and applied its ideals of reverence for nature and subjective imagination to their works. Their art often juxtaposed untouched wilderness with signs of human settlement to convey themes of discovery, exploration, and the coexistence of civilization and nature. Cole's landscapes of Cotterskill Fall and Catskill Mountains present the American wilderness as a place of profound beauty and spiritual significance. They resonate with contemporary philosophical movements like Transcendentalism, which emphasize the inherent goodness of nature and the individual's spiritual connection to it. The works of the Hudson River School influenced subsequent movements, including the more meditative Luminism. This movement emphasized the landscape itself with diminishing human presence and a distinct focus on the radiant effects of light and the atmosphere. Led by John Frederick Kensett, Luminism parted ways with the monumental dramatic scenes that came before them and instead focused on smaller and quieter canvases. Luminist artists were associated with a particular locale as they returned to the same scenes, painting the changing lights and atmosphere from day to day and season to season. They revealed no brushstrokes. They hid their hand in the painting and created silent, almost impersonal surfaces of effervescent beauty. We can see that here in Fitzhenry Lane's 1863 painting, Lumber Schooners at Evening on Penobscot Bay. The painting is not about the people or the ship, though they're there, rendered with all the care of a miniaturist. What grabs us is the sweep of nature, the seemingly infinite sky, and the water catching the light just so. The calm atmosphere is contagious, as if the painting is breathing out, and we are breathing it in. The Luminists inspired a new generation of artists, the Tonalists, who took this a step further. They embraced a more poetic approach to landscape painting that prioritized mood, harmony, and subtle gradation of color over meticulous representation. These artists carefully chose their often neutral color palettes, softly brushed in the contours with visible strokes, used layer glazes to invoke the density of the unseen air, and painted dreamlike twilight and night scenes of introspective quiet. James McNeill Whistler, though American by birth, developed his mature tonalist style while living and working in England. His painting, Nocturne Blue and Silver Chelsea, depicts the River Thames at twilight. The colors are varying shades of blue that were applied in thin layers. Sometimes he painted while the paint was still wet, which gave the colors a soft, fluid look that blends together smoothly. The influence of Japanese woodblock prints is clear in this work, through both Whistler's limited color palette, similar to the restrained tones often found in Japanese prints, and the butterfly motif at the bottom, which he used as his signature. He once said, "A nocturne is an arrangement of line, form, and color first," articulating that a painting should be valued for its formal qualities rather than for its narrative or literal content. Artistic movements often overlap and don't always progress in a neat linear fashion. While landscape paintings really flourished in the 19th century, other artists were responding to the ever-evolving social and economic realities of American life. So let's now look at a parallel branch of American art history defined by its focus on human subjects, everyday life, and and the nation's defining moments. In the 1850s, population growth and economic expansion led to a more active art market, which included auctions, art lotteries, and more urban galleries popping up. This expansion also led to artists wanting to distinguish their styles in a competitive market. This carved a small space for perspectives of women artists like Lily Martin Spencer, whose representations of domestic life offered a nuanced critique of gender roles. In Spencer's Young Husband and Young Wife, we see the reality of early married life. The young man carries an overflowing basket of groceries, struggling with his role and the judgmental gazes of amused onlookers. The young woman peels an onion as she looks at the mismatched purchases of her husband, while a confused maid stands by. In these companion pieces, we see the challenges and sometimes humor of domestic adjustment in 19th century America. This painting, Washington Crossing the Delaware, is one of the most recognizable images in the history of American art. It doesn't fit into a specific movement that was alive during the time, yet it still played a critical role in shaping American national identity and political discourse. It might be interesting to know that it was not crafted on American soil, nor by a native-born artist. Emanuel Leutze, a German-American immigrant, painted this piece in Dusseldorf, Germany. The scene he chose to immortalize in its monumental size took place more than 7 decades before he picked up his brush. George Washington leading his troop across the Delaware River on the night of December 25, 1776. This bold maneuver aimed at launching a surprise attack on Hessian forces near Trenton proved to be a pivotal and morale-boosting victory for the Continental Army. Crammed into the small boat are 13 figures, each individual's clothing hinting at their diverse backgrounds. One wears a tarpaulin jacket, likely representing a sailor from New England, his features suggesting African ancestry. Another is a Scottish immigrant in a Balmoral cap. In the forefront, there's an androgynous figure, perhaps a woman, in a loose red shirt, helping to row. Leutze's intention was to encourage European reformers during the 1848 revolutions taking place in Germany, urging them to see the American Revolution as a beacon of liberty and national unity. It's important to note that despite Leutze's fascination with history, the painting takes quite a few liberties with the facts. The flag depicted, for example, was not adopted until months after the event. As well, the boat is unrealistically small for the number of people it carries. The actual crossing happened in the dead of night, yet Leutze paints it at dawn. The river shown is wide and icy, more reminiscent of the Rhine than the Delaware. Most famously, Washington stands upright at the boat's prow, a dramatic but improbable stance in such a vessel. The American Civil War of the 1860s had a profound impact on art history, shifting from romanticized landscapes and nationalist portraits to realism and documentary accuracy that reflected the unprecedented violence and social upheaval of the time. Artists couldn't pretend anymore. They couldn't retreat into their imagination. Eastman Johnson's A Ride for Liberty, The Fugitive Slaves, is of an enslaved family fleeing towards the safety of Union lines in the dim early morning light. What sets this work apart from most art of the era is the complete absence of white figures. The African-American family is shown as the central force in their own liberation, acting decisively to secure their freedom. Johnson stated that the painting was inspired by an incident he personally witnessed near the Manassas, Virginia battlefield on March 2, 1862, just before the Union troops took control of the area. Another artist who faced the truth of the time and painted it was Winslow Homer. He, among others, began showing us not the idea of America, but its entrails. Originally a commercial printmaker, Homer transitioned into becoming a serious painter during this era, which marked a broader professionalization of American art. His paintings, The Veteran in a New Field and Prisoners from the Front, show us a deeper understanding of the impacts of war. His work addressed universal themes through specifically American subjects, with an honest eye and an emotional restraint. And this is when artists' imagination gave way to the truth they observed around them. the aftermath of the Civil War, there came a collective ache for the innocence that seemed lost to the war. This nostalgia found visual expression in the proliferation of images of children who became symbols of hope and renewal. In Winslow Homer's Snap the Whip painting, we see the spirited energy of childhood captured. This group of barefooted boys are playing a lively game outside, closely connected to the natural world around them. The cooperation and unity that's required in their game is a symbol for the broader need for national healing. Yet Homer still acknowledges the difficulties ahead by showing the boy on the left losing his grip. The weathered red schoolhouse in the background is there to evoke fond memories of rural traditions, just as America was beginning to face the uncertainties of industrialization. By the mid-1870s, the United States had become a major industrial power, behind only Great Britain and France. Industrial growth, especially in the North, was driven by widespread use of coal-powered machinery and steam engines, leading to the rise of factories in urban centers. This created many new jobs and helped support the growth of the middle class, now with a little time and a little money to spare. So suddenly, thanks to the marvels of the modern printing press, affordable books and color prints flood the market at increased speeds and volumes. Culture, which was once a luxury, became an everyday pleasure for the many, not the few. As well, increased immigration, spurred by the Irish potato famine and German unrest, changed urban demographics and expanded the industrial workforce. Exposure to European culture grew through travel, art reproductions, and the founding of major museums, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Museums of Fine Art in Boston and Philadelphia. Interest in contemporary European art, particularly French, increased, and more American artists traveled to Europe to study new styles and techniques and embraced a new sense of internationalism. It was around this time that American Impressionism began to take shape. Major exhibitions in New York and Boston introduced French Impressionist works to the American public. Although audiences were drawn to the landscape pieces, they recoiled at the frank realism and nudity in figure paintings. While the movement's origin is undeniably indebted to the innovations of the French Impressionists, whose radical techniques and modern subject matter had already upended the European art world, American artists adapted these principles to reflect their own unique setting and sensibilities. American Impressionism favored more asymmetrical compositions, cropped figures, and steep perspectives. These artists applied pure color directly from the tube, used broken brushstrokes, and practiced impasto, a style of painting characterized by thick, raised strokes. Mary Cassatt and Childe Hassam are two of America's most well-known Impressionists. Cassatt represents a remarkable case of transatlantic artistic exchange. She moved to Paris in 1866 at the age of 22 to study art privately, as women were not yet able to attend most academic institutions. There, she became friends with Edgar Degas, who invited her to exhibit with the French Impressionists in 1877. In fact, she was the only American artist to have exhibited with the original Impressionists in France. She even leveraged her connections to America's upper class to purchase Impressionist pieces, helping to seed the great collections that would eventually fill American museums. Ever the quiet revolutionary, Cassatt painted women not as objects to be gazed upon, but as people with things to do. That is most clearly evident in her painting, The Child's Bath. The subjects, a woman, presumably a mother, and a young child, are positioned closely, nearly filling the entire canvas. Her posture is protective and careful, her left hand holding the child gently while the right one washes her foot. The composition draws us into a private, everyday moment that's made elevated through Cassatt's careful attention to perspective, pattern, and mood. While Cassatt's art advanced the representation of women and family, another American artist, Childe Hassam, worked to immerse viewers in the picturesque scenes of New York and the Northeast. My favorite work of his, one that I couldn't look away from, is Celia Thaxter's Garden, Isles of Shoals, Maine. It's part of a series he painted while staying on Appledore Island just off Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Before us is a profusion of flowers, scarlet poppies and wildflowers dancing in the breeze, cultivated by Hassam's friend Celia Thaxter, an American writer, poet, and clearly a great gardener. Behind them, sun-bleached rocks and the ocean stretch out, giving us both a sense of depth and a glimpse into Hassam's total view. The poppies, though, are the true stars, their colors a marvelous contrast to the harsh, rugged landscape of the island. The paint application is lively and spontaneous, capturing the fleeting effects of sunlight and the movement of a summer breeze over the flowers and surrounding foliage. It might seem like Hassam has painted a perfect view, but this piece is not an escapist fantasy. The garden was real and rooted in lived experience, painted by an artist who understood that reality, when seen with clarity and affection, is more than enough. By the 1900s, American visual arts had completed a profound transformation from indigenous erasure and colonial dependency to national artistic maturity, establishing the institutional, aesthetic, and cultural foundations that would define American art in the 20th century. Artists believed themselves to be powerful agents who shaped how their fellow Americans saw themselves and their place in the world. As they moved away from European artistic conventions, they grappled with the vastness and diversity of the American experience, its landscapes, its people, its geographical, political, and social tensions. In this way, the art of early America endures not as a relic, but as a living echo of the hopes, fears, and dreams that shaped a nation.